Okay, so good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, just as we move past noon. Today's Powering Podiums is going to talk about strength and conditioning in a COVID-19 world. Just quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. So obviously we've got everybody on mute here. I'll be monitoring the chat box. So if when we do a question and answer session at the end, if you want to speak, please raise your hand or just go directly into the chat box. And we are recording this session for viewing for you later or for referencing, and we'll attempt to get this on the CSI Pacific website as quickly as possible. So just before we start, just again, thanks to everybody. And I hope you and your loved ones are all staying well. So today's schedule, very quickly, I'll just set the scene for us, and then I'm pleased to introduce to you David O'Mahony and Mary Claire Chennault from CSI Pacific. And our guest coach today will be Luca Dalla from BC Soccer, and he's the soccer development officer there. And specifically, Luca works with the BC Soccer High Performance League program, and is the connection between BC Soccer and the Vancouver Whitecaps. And then we'll do some questions and comments at the end there. So very quickly, Dave, there's a picture of Dave there. He's originally from Ireland, recently moved to Canada, and he's now involved as a regional strength and conditioning coach with CSI Pacific. Alongside working in strength and conditioning in New Zealand and Sweden, Dave was last 5 years working in Holland. So Dave has a wealth of knowledge and experience to bring to the table, so it's great to have Dave with us today. Mary Claire Chennault was varsity athlete in hockey and track and field, and she was at the University of Toronto, and she has her undergrad degree there in kinesiology, and she has a Masters of Exercise Science also at U of T, as you can see there on neck strength and condition. Mary Claire's been with CSIP for about a year, and she's an assistant strength and conditioning coach with rowing, para-triathlon and mountain biking, and she'll be sharing some of her experiences with us today. So again, great to have Mary Claire on board today. And then here is Luca. Luca, as I said earlier, Luca's with BC Soccer. Luca's been with them since, I think, March 2009 and worked in various roles. I've had the opportunity to, within soccer, to work with Luca, and it's great to have him here today. What Luca's going to do is he's going to talk a little bit about some of the work that they're doing with the high performance athletes at BC Soccer, based around strength and conditioning during the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment. So the idea here is to try to talk a little bit about what strength and conditioning looks like in the new normal. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm really getting tired of hearing new normal, and I'm getting tired of saying new normal, so I think I might just start saying normal. What should we be telling our athletes to do? And what should we be advising against? And then maybe how are we able to monitor our athletes during this time? I know a lot of us are using online tools and maybe using Zoom. I know a lot of sports are using Zoom to do almost virtual training sessions, which is great. We can see our athletes, but how are we able to monitor the progress and what they're doing at this particular time? So from a coaching perspective, where are we at the moment? What phase would we be in if we talked about a YTP, yearly training plan? Well, my feelings are we're not in transition. When we're in transition or we're in a rest period, we have this date for pre-season, and it's always at the back of our mind when we need to be ready to start thinking about activity again. And we're certainly not in pre-season because we have no date for our first event. We're really in a situation here where we are in lockdown, we are in this state of limbo, and I wonder to myself what we could call this phase or what we would call this phase, because it's new for all of us, and it's certainly not normal. And I just wonder how we as coaches can be ready to get our athletes back into top shape, and that's hopefully what we're going to be talking about today. And then I think in terms, again, as coaching, we're always asking our athletes how they're doing and how are they feeling, and I'm sure you're like me, you're having lots of conversations with other people, and just off the top of my head, these are 5 words that I keep hearing from people. We're uncertain about the future. From a professional situation, some of us are concerned whether we're going to stay in jobs. We're hearing of franchises that are struggling and groups that are going under. So we're worried about, that sort of situation. There's a lot of confusion out there. People are not sure what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. Obviously, that leads to frustration. And people we don't have this area where we might be able to vent or discuss things and talk them through. We know there's a lot of anxiety out there at the moment, and certainly for the betterment of our health, we are isolated, but it's really a difficult situation to be in terms of isolation. And of course, none of these things are positive. None of these are positive words that we would want to be talking to our fellow coaches and our athletes about. And our job is to try to keep our athletes activated, certainly mentally and certainly tactically and technically if we can, but our focus today is going to be around that physical piece. So our outcomes today are to facilitate a discussion around how we can adjust our processes and able to deliver S&C programs in this COVID-19 world that we're in at the moment. Providing some information on the do's and don'ts so that we can make sure that we're safeguarding athletes and also safeguarding coaches as well. Looking to identify best practices in strength and conditioning during the restrictions that we find ourselves in. Hoping to see if we can help provide the best and safest environment for our athletes and coaches. Again, sharing best practices and providing information on what is safe and what we should avoid with our athletes. We will also be, making these presentations available to you on the website. And I also had the opportunity to send out a paper to you that Dave and Mary Claire had sent to me. So that's really where we're going to be. That's where we're going to be at, hopefully, for the next hour and a half. So if we can just bear with me a second here, and I'll line up the document for Dave and Mary Claire to speak to, and then I'm going to put myself on mute here, and I'm going to hand over to Dave and Mary Claire and welcome them here, and look forward to hearing what they have to say. I think we're just in the process of working that back. So I'll put myself on mute, and it's over to Dave and MC.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so first of all, just massive thanks to Andrew for organizing and for the opportunity to present. And also massive thanks to everyone for joining. I hope everyone's doing well under the difficult circumstances that we find ourselves in. Okay, so just going to try and share some best practices and some considerations that we can be aware of, with the end goal of eventually returning back to sport at a good level and doing so in a structured way. So obviously this is a globally unprecedented situation, but specific to the sporting world, there may actually be a couple of situations which we can take some lessons from, and also how we can try and overcome the challenges that we face right now. Okay, so probably a very good example of what can happen when training is ceased for a relatively long period of time and then returns without a lack of appropriate build-up to tolerate the kind of workloads needed for sport is the NFL lockout of 2011, I believe. So basically what happened is, obviously a dispute between the players and the owners over contracts, and pretty much it was a strike situation. So during that period, the players did not train centrally. They had no access to facilities, to staff, and probably the amount of training that was done varied massively, individual to individual. What we see in the upper part of the picture here is ACL tendon ruptures in the period of 97 to 2002, and we're looking at about 5 across the whole season, 2 in the preseason. And what's important to note there is that there was a very long build-up phase, so the players could accumulate to the kind of volumes and intensity needed for the sport. What happened in 2011 then is that instead of a 14-week build-up, they had 17 days before the first preseason game happened. And as you can see there, 12 Achilles tendon ruptures in that time frame. So if we think about how that might relate to us, it really stresses the importance of accumulating workloads and preparing the body for the demands of sport. What we may face is, again, a shortened preseason if there's time pressure to get seasons back up and running. Potentially, the playing season will have less rest in between games, as happened with the NBA lockout, and a very big chance that players are going to be less adequately prepared for sport than if we had a normal training scenario. Okay, so just if we again focus on what we can do at this point in time, it is in a strange way an opportunity to work on skills maybe that we neglect due to time pressure or busy lifestyles. So just there's a number of things we can work on. So nutrition being one. I don't know if anyone's like me, but if I look at food, I gain weight. If I'm not on top of that, that can happen pretty quickly. And obviously for athletes, body composition is important in terms of both performing and reducing risk of injury. Psychological skills, we can probably look at that both from a health and mental well-being standpoint. But also in terms of sports psychology, so there may be avenues there to improve that particular skill set with the goal of returning back to sport. Technical skill set, this is something that Luca and BC Soccer have done really well. They've made sure that the players have access to training programs to keep technical skills sharp. Obviously, for different sports, this is going to be a different challenge. Some sports it's quite easy to do individually. With other sports, it's very difficult. So that'll be on an individual basis, and of course, within the framework of social distancing and hygiene that we find ourselves in. Finally, then tactical skills, video analysis, or analyzing plays, set plays, all that kind of thing. So again, these are important factors to consider, which probably go beyond the scope of what we can cover today. So then just to contrast how S&C normally works, as Andrew touched on. Normally, we know exactly when peak moments are, we know what the competition schedule is, and when the players need to perform, but also how long we have to prepare them for that. So typically we begin with the end goal in mind and work backwards from there, trying to build the physiological qualities which support performance, whatever that may be. We can also select a periodization model which fits the needs of the athlete or the sport or the competitive schedule, and plan our training around that. Really important is, again, access to facilities. And then within that, a really, really crucial one is access to medical staff. where these kind of assessments that need to be done, treating injury or screening, can be done in person. Obviously, equipment that we have access to is typically going to be better. And then also the chance to monitor. So the extent to which we can monitor will vary based on the context that you find yourself in. But even just being in person and being able to ask someone how you're doing can give you quite a lot of information about how they're responding to training. In the scenario we find ourselves in now, again, as Andrew mentioned, we don't know when we need to perform. We don't know how it's going to look like. Is the season going to be shortened? Is it going to be condensed? Will we have a season? These are all questions that right now we don't have access to, information to. Typically, for most people, probably there's going to be less access to equipment, which can improve training. Training's obviously done remotely, and obviously it's difficult for anyone to kind of motivate themselves when they don't know when they're going to need to perform. So on top of the normal just mental health factors that we find ourselves in, less personal contact, less social interaction, particularly in teams. This is going to be an issue. So yeah, we need to be creative in terms of finding solutions to that. So maybe online coaching, as a lot of people have done, increasing autonomy of athletes in their training. So maybe providing a menu where they can self-select, given a certain framework, or maybe even just allowing training to be a little bit more fun than we normally would, less prescribed, and just trying to keep the body moving. Okay, so we'll just talk briefly about what's probably happening for a lot of people at the moment. So for the vast majority of us, we're in a scenario where training is either completely ceased or it's very limited compared to normal. So as you can see here, the work done by Vladimir Isarin details how quickly developed qualities can deteriorate. So at the top end, we have an aerobic endurance, which typically decays a little bit slower than some other qualities, along with maximal strength. Move into the more anaerobic pathways and muscle endurance type of work, which you're looking at probably about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And then really important for any sport that requires sprinting or high intensity work, that maximum speed work, alactic work, deteriorates very quickly. So if we look at returning to sport with the best possibility of performing at a high level as possible, this is going to be something that we should try to address in our training at the moment. Okay, so what can we do in the scenario that we find ourselves in? Really, what's going to be crucial is to identify what it is in your particular sport that's either a key performance indicator, so what kind of quality separates good players from less good players or great players from good players. Additionally, what kind of demands of the sport are most likely to cause injury. This is going to be important, and then try and find ways to stimulate that particular system or pathway. It's a big opportunity to maybe develop physical qualities which are less optimally developed during sport practice, or qualities that we just can't train at the moment because of training cessation. It's a good chance to develop the body in very general means. So particularly, we'll cover this later, but development of the aerobic system, Strength, if it's possible. For a lot of us, that's going to be a challenge. But also more explosive work, so sprinting, jumping, plyometrics, and any sport-specific quality that we can. But what's important is to consider that the general foundation of work that we do now will eventually help us through supporting those more specific pathways once we return. And again, just try to keep the end goal in mind. We all want to get back playing sport, and we want to do it at as high a level as possible, and with as low of an injury risk as possible. Okay, so just on the topic of maintaining workload, just like to talk briefly about the work that Tim Gavitt has popularized. So just take this with a grain of salt. These danger zones and injury risks and sweet spots. We're talking about risk. It's not that if someone goes into a danger zone, they're automatically going to get injured. There's lots of factors which influence this, so biomechanics, different physical qualities, all these. Injury is a multifactorial scenario. So basically, the graph on the left, what we see is when we get rapid spikes in workload. So what might happen when we return to preseason training, volume and intensity increases, so does risk of injury. On the flip side, on the right-hand side, basically accumulated work will help us out once we get back to sport. So the more work we can do now, that we gradually increase, once we're back to normal sport participation, this is going to reduce our risk of getting injured in preseason. Okay. Okay. So again, very, very important to mention that we should build training volume and intensity gradually. Just because we have a lot more free time now doesn't mean that athletes can be absolutely smashed with volume and intensity. So this needs to be built slowly. We can aim to develop physical qualities which will mitigate our risk. I'll touch on that later. And then if we think about potential problems that we might encounter for different sports, for field sports or court sports, we're probably looking at tendon injuries, maybe hamstring injuries, groin injuries for the sports with a lot of change of direction. For overhead sports, so your swimming and your baseball, again, tendon issues, but specifically shoulder issues. And then athletics or more endurance-based sports, maybe we're looking at stress fracture or, again, tendon issues. Particularly for overhead athletes that have that really specific skill set of throwing or swimming, maintaining workload wherever possible is crucial. So baseball player, you don't want to stop throwing and then immediately come back to preseason and throw 100 pitches a day. Swimming, it's obviously a bit of a challenge, but there's some good videos on the CSI Pacific website, or YouTube channel, I mean, which demonstrated exercises which can help to strengthen the shoulder. Athletics, rowing, and endurance. For some sports, maybe nothing has changed. For other sports, maybe it's a challenge, but try to identify areas of concern which we can address right now. Okay, so if we talk a little bit about factors which can reduce our risk of injury on return, but also potentially increase performance, developing the aerobic system is one which will have a considerable payoff once we return. So the two articles on the left and the center, they look at fatigue following rugby games and what physical factors influence recovery from those games. And what they found is that strength and aerobic fitness, when they subcategorized groups into high and low fitness, high strength and high aerobic fitness, and compared those to athletes that were less well aerobically developed and less strong. 24 and 48 hours post-game, creatine kinase levels were lower in the fitter and stronger groups, and also power during jumping. If we talk about the article on the right, so again, maybe the role that high levels of aerobic fitness can play for repeat sprints. Basically what they found is that as repeat sprints go on, the contribution of the aerobic system plays an increasingly greater role. So depending on the specific task or the sprint, whether it's cycling or sprint running, it in some cases can be up to 40% of total contribution is from the aerobic system. This is something, just to touch briefly on those energy systems, our highest intensity is going to be the ATP-CP system. That gives us our highest yield and highest power output, and it's probably going to be the pathway which is most influential, particularly for team sports. It's that rapid, explosive burst which separates you from your opponent. What's important to note is that it's limited in duration, and the classic example that's easy to relate to is the 100-meter sprint. It's primarily going to be with this pathway. Second anaerobic pathway is anaerobic glycolysis. Also relatively high intensity, but not very long duration. Okay, so the classic example here is going to be a 400-meter is going to be primarily this pathway. But as you can see, that system is maxed out at about 90 seconds maximum. An 800-meter maybe is going to be a 50-50 split between anaerobic and aerobic pathways. If we look at the bottom then, okay, so the intensity relative to the other two is quite low with our aerobic system. This will last for events of maybe 90 seconds and above to a number of hours. Classic example being the marathon. And what's important here is that that system provides energy which is very sustainable, but also it has a very important role in resynthesizing that high intensity ATP-C system. Okay, if we talk about developing the aerobic system, it's very trainable. So relative to the more anaerobic pathways, particularly anaerobic glycolysis, you can continue to adapt very, very long term with aerobic training, whereas more anaerobic glycolysis, the window of opportunity to adapt is lower, relatively speaking. In the context that we find ourselves in now, it's very practical, so we don't need any equipment. It can be a matter of getting out for a run, getting out for an interval session. Limited equipment needed, obviously, of course, within the framework of social distancing and hygiene. What's also important to mention is that this can be trained through different cross-training methods, so particularly for sports which are unable to complete regular practice at the moment. Yeah, we can maintain aerobic fitness through basically maintaining the heart's ability to pump blood and oxygen to the working muscles, but also the local muscles which are specific to the sport. These can also be trained and lay a foundation for when your sport resumes. So we can increase the local system structures to absorb oxygen and also clear metabolic byproducts. Okay, so if we talk about the benefits as to how that will relate to sport when we return, important one to mention is that increased levels of aerobic fitness lead to increased levels of cognitive performance. Okay, so if we think about potentially in fatiguing moments of a game or a race, the fitter you are, the greater chance you have of not making mental errors. Recovery, as mentioned before, so recovery both between games, day to day, and also recovery between repeated bouts of high intensity effort. So through that aerobic resynthesis of our highest threshold pathways. Also, as mentioned in the Gabbett paper, it's one of the factors which is a mitigator in terms of workload spikes. So again, the fitter you are aerobically, the more resilient you are to spikes in your general workload. Would also mention strength being very important there as a modifier, or a modifier of spikes in workload. But obviously the aerobic system in the situation we find ourselves right now is, for most of us, a bit more practical to train. Okay, so plyometrics. Again, this is one that's going to play a really important role in our training at the moment. So been linked to increases in running economy. Can improve strength. So again, you get that double benefit there, that you can increase explosive power, but also strength as a more general concept. The benefits for sports requiring jumping or sprinting or throwing. There's evidence to suggest that that's going to help. Injury prevention. So particularly when we talk about tendons, that eccentric loading at relatively high intensities, if dosed properly, will strengthen the tendon and make us more resilient to injury. Again, specific to the scenario that we find ourselves in right now, limited equipment required, which obviously makes it a very attractive means to train at the moment. Okay, very important to mention. So both plyometrics and sprinting. Okay, so sprinting obviously being a physical quality that can decrease quite rapidly. Jumping and explosive performances, whether that be throwing or sprinting or jumping, also tends to, the residual training effect tends to be less than other qualities. It's a very potent stimulator of the central nervous system, so recovery between bouts of this type of exercise is very important. But also then, if we talk about potentially returning to sport, if we can sprint now, that will give us a bit of an inoculation against higher intensity work once we return. Again, very important that this is gradually increased in intensity and volume, because it can be a double-edged sword. If we send all of our athletes out right now, tell them to do 10 sets of 100 meters with 30 seconds of recovery, chances are they're going to be either extremely sore or extremely injured afterwards. Okay, strength. Obviously, this is potentially one of the more difficult qualities to train at the moment. But there are a number of strategies that we can use to increase strength or maintain it. Okay, so isometrics, that can be either yielding or overcoming. Yielding being holding your body in a position against gravity, and overcoming being trying to move an object that you can't move. So there's some videos I can send later which show how you can train isometrically using just a towel, and you can obviously be flexible in terms of what you train and be creative and get a strength stimulus there. Important to mention, strength with isometric work is specific to the range of motion that's trained. So if you incorporate isometrics into your training, you're going to want to train multiple points in the range of motion of a particular joint or movement. Okay, other things we can do: unilateral training, so training with one arm or one leg, can lead to similar outcomes in terms of strength to bilateral training, but obviously in the situation we are right now, you need less total load to stimulate that. Also really good for training stability. We can manipulate leverage and tempo of exercise. Again, I'll talk about this in the next slide a little bit more in detail. And then blood flow restriction. Okay, so very important here that if you were to incorporate blood flow restriction, it's cleared by medical professionals. What this does is it occludes blood flow to a working muscle and causes a decrease in the intensity required to maintain particularly muscle volume versus classic strength training. But again, very, very important that each individual that may want to use this gets medical clearance, because you don't want to play around with the vascular system. If there are any underlying issues, it's crucial that it's safe to do so, and this needs to be checked with the appropriate medical staff. Okay, so how we can manipulate bodyweight exercises. We can manipulate the tempo or the time under tension, so lowering the body slower eccentric phases. We can manipulate the body position, so increase or decrease mechanical advantage. Classic example maybe is in a push-up, where to make the movement easier, you'll elevate your hands on a bench or a table, and to increase difficulty, you will elevate your feet. Intent, so increasing the speed of the movement. So for example, plyometric push-ups needs to be a maximum effort you can maintain explosive strength. Bilateral and unilateral training, touched on that in the previous slide. Okay, so just some practical recommendations. If we look at a vertically integrated periodization model, what we try to do is kind of hedge our bets and cover all bases. Right now, a little bit more focus on general physical qualities, and then as we get more information on when we can return, then start shifting the emphasis towards more specific movement patterns, intensities, speeds, velocities, that kind of thing. Okay, again, as touched on before, identify the sport-specific demands which we can train, either as specific as possible or adapted to maintain load on the body. And again, very, very important that volume and intensity is gradually increased. We have a lot of time right now. There's no pressure at this point in time to ramp up volume or intensity unnecessarily. So yeah, if you want to bake a cake, you need to follow the temperature restrictions. If you put it twice as hot, it doesn't come out twice as fast. So same with the human body. Some things just need a certain amount of time and a certain stimulus. Okay, so briefly, if we touch on how this might look practically with that vertically integrated model for soccer. Week 1, we touch all our bases. We have a speed, a high intensity interval, a strength session, and a steady state cardiovascular workout. As a warm-up for the steady state, we incorporate some multi-directional patterns, so change of direction technique work, which again will lay a foundation for when we start increasing intensity and specificity as the season returns. Then we have a short 3-week block where we start trying to increase volume, and then the last 2 weeks of the program we just see our 5th week of the 6 weeks. But the last 2 weeks, then we remove one of those endurance type sessions and add another speed session. So again, speed sessions separated as much as possible, with an off day preceding it where possible. Okay, and then varsity basketball, different scenario, different training age. We have a little bit more of a maintenance of strength focus, but also integrating plyometric work. Again, to get to this point, we started off at lower intensities and built to the point that we are now. Again, So a couple of speed sessions a week, a couple of interval sessions a week, and a couple of strength with one endurance session. Okay, so in terms of how we might progress plyometrics in order to give the body time to adapt, just would clarify here that really only the level 3 phase here are plyometrics in the strictest sense of the word. But if we look at this very simplified 3-phase model, what we look at doing is trying to train the body to deal with eccentric forces and landing skills. Start moving into level 2, a little bit higher intensity, more focused on production of force and power, and then our real high intensity plyometric work. So for younger athletes or athletes coming off a layoff, probably most of our time is going to be spent in level 1 and 2. Shifting that more towards level 2 as we accumulate some volume, and gradually introduce phase 3 as we get closer to return to sport. Okay, and then just a very, very simple conditioning progression aimed at increasing aerobic power. This should be noted that this is a COVID specific kind of program. Normally we'd like to include training intensities as a very important variable, but just in the interest of keeping everything as simple as possible, just work off work-rest ratios. And then over the 5 weeks, basically just try to accumulate volume. And then once we know more about when we can come back, we'll start to build that pyramid up to higher intensity work. Okay, and then just hand you over to MC, who's going to give a couple of practical examples of what's happening with her athletes. And just hand you over to MC, who's going to give some more practical examples.
Okay, thanks, Dave. You did a really good job of kind of covering all the basis and theoretical framework around what to consider with the training programs. So guys, what I'm going to cover is just essentially how we went through determining what we were going to do with both our rowing and triathlon athletes over the course of the past, what's it been, month or so. So initially, what our initial thoughts were that it was going to be a temporary training environment where we were trying to maintain those gains that we were previously developed to then have a relatively quick return back to normal. But as things kind of unfolded, our purpose of training changed and we had to adapt kind of on the fly. Additionally, what we had to do was adapt for various differences in athletes' accessibility to things, to various equipment, or when athletes went back to their hometowns, some were in places where they couldn't actually run outside or couldn't train outside or didn't have an erg, etc. So we really had to manipulate the training goals as an integrated support staff and determine what our main priorities were, and then try to target that on an individual basis. So I'll begin with kind of when the integrated support staff met, what we determined our scenario was and how we moved forward. So most of our athletes were forced to be in isolation training. Some of this was they were quarantined in their house. So some of our triathletes had to spend 2 weeks without going outside. So that, resulted in a lot of biking, trying to maintain contacts, running, etc. Like I mentioned, there was a range of resources and accessibility equipment. The major hit was there was no on-water training for rowers, so they couldn't be in a boat, and also no swimming for triathletes or swimmers. So that was a main barrier that we had to cross. And also, we didn't know what the actual timeline to return to training was. Like I mentioned, it was a bit variable to begin with, and so we had to make adjustments in the purpose of training. And even so, we were getting bi-weekly updates, but we really don't know how long this is going to last. So we had to look at the main goals what we wanted to achieve over this period of time and try to target those. So I first want to touch on something that's really important that some people potentially overlook. When we met with the physiologists and the medical staff of Rowing Canada, it was brought to our attention just the importance of keeping our athletes healthy, and that was the main priority. So the athletes are extremely trained, well trained, so they have a capacity to almost do absolute rest and still be able to come back when we want them to train, and as long as there's an adequate return to play process. But our main goal was to keep them healthy and increase immune function, or at least maintain a good immune function. A lot of the time the Olympic athletes are training at that edge, so they're very much pushing the envelope all the time, especially this time of year. If they were to go into competitions around this time, they're approaching race weight, which can be a little bit unhealthy for some individuals. They're really, if they're not on the ball with everything, they can compromise their immune function. So we had to take a step back and really reinforce the importance of moderate to heavy exercise is kind of our limit, because we want to optimize the immune function during this time to prevent anyone from getting sick. If that means a little bit of moderate work for a few weeks instead of getting sick and being out for 4 weeks, we had to kind of reinforce that the importance of that. I'm just going to share in the comment box this paper for you guys to read. It has a good overlook of kind of the areas of consideration in different training modalities. So for the rowers, we decided as an IST, so integrated support staff, that we were going to return to kind of general preparatory phase. So, take a step back. That's a tough thing for athletes to do when they are training to compete, to say, hold back, we're building the base again that Dave mentioned before. But it was really important that we did that, and the message was clear across the coaching staff, the strength and conditioning, and the physiologists, and the medical, that we really needed to start building the base again. And it's now, athletes are buying in now, and it's been successful so far. What we were able to do is all the athletes got an erg. So that's a rowing machine here, the Concept 2. And so they're able to do some workouts at home in their living room or whatnot. So that's a really big benefit for rowing is, unlike other sports, unlike swimming, for instance, we do have the erg, although it's not perfect, relationship to on-water boat performance. It's pretty close, and it's close enough for what we can do now, which is great. With that said, because, rowers do a ton of volume, they do multiple sessions a day, changing up cross-training modalities is important as well. So we have a lot of individuals who either have had road bikes or have now purchased a new road bike, etc., and they're doing a lot of their training, on the erg plus on a bike, which is really beneficial for those athletes, because the erg can actually be a lot of mechanical load if you do all of your volume on that device. Something else that we were able to do is athletes who were close to a hub, so if they stayed in Victoria or if they returned home near another rowing or Canadian Sport Institute hub, they were provided with some equipment. So we were able to give them plates and barbells and other pieces of equipment to facilitate their training, which is really helpful. And we also were able to make their monitoring more elaborate. So we took some erg monitoring, which is like a power output test, as well as initiated some wellness monitoring that we really reinforced the athletes to do, which was really important, because in a lot of cases, people were doing, although the work prescribed was relatively the same, there are different situations. Maybe someone has a road bike, maybe someone has a crappy, rusty bike, and so the workouts prescribed could be different. So we tried to we have weekly meetings with the coaches and physiologists and strength and conditioning coaches to talk about monitoring and base training plans off of that, because we really want to keep, like I mentioned to you guys before, with the illness and immune function, we want to keep them in a certain zone they're not pushing too hard. And initially we saw that even though athletes were doing the prescribed load in the workout plan, they were doing it too hard. So they're doing something that was supposed to be quote unquote C6 as rowers' term, which is, lower aerobic activity. They were going high intensity in certain blocks of duration that were not supposed to be that hard, and so we were able to adjust training plans based off of that, based off of their rate of perceived exertion, and so that has been really helpful for us to really use that information more than when everyone was in the same environment, where we had a little more face-to-face feedback. So in addition to trying to optimize the training in the way that we wanted to, from an S&C and physiology standpoint, we also saw that this was an important opportunity to address the other factors that, were potentially on the back burner when we were approaching competition season. So the first one, a mental break. These athletes were preparing to go to the Olympics, and then they were told Canada is no longer sending athletes to the Olympics. So that was an initial hit. The second hit, a few days later, Olympics were postponed, and so athletes who had family plans, who were planning to retire after the 2020 Olympics, etc., really had to rethink their position, and it was a lot on the athletes. So, like I mentioned before, they're always training on that edge, and especially this time of season, typically. And so they really needed that mental break and bring the training down to a moderate level, whether it was a few days off, etc. So they worked with a coach, worked with the IST to really make sure that they got the mental support they needed. We work with a mental performance coach as well, who's been very busy at this time, just to make sure everyone's on the right mindset and moving forward positively. Additionally, which was a huge aspect, is we were able to check in on those nagging injuries that were potentially, not severe enough to prevent someone from rowing all the time, but were definitely not ideal. So we're able to kind of address those and modify training accordingly that we wouldn't be able to do if they were doing typical training. So we're working with the physiotherapists and the medical staff to appropriately integrate those into the training plans, and we have a lot more degrees of freedom now in order to do that. And additionally, what we've done with the S&C and physiotherapy personnel on the staff is put together specific core, shoulder, and rib injury prevention programs that are heavily influencing their program right now, just to make them more durable when they do return to full training. And like I said, because they do such high training loads, typically around this time of season, those don't necessarily get addressed. So this is an opportunity to address those, get our athletes as durable as possible and as resilient, so that when they do return to regular training loads, their risk of injury is potentially reduced, hopefully reduced, as long as those are, as long as our work or our programs, work. Guess we'll see. We were able to expand their cross-training library, so they're not just erging all the time. Now they're able to bike. They're able to do other things that would typically be the physiology adaptations from on the water. They're able to do in different modalities, which it can involve different muscle groups, can relieve those overuse, those potentials for overuse injuries, etc. And so this is a potential of maybe, allowing another modality of training when they do return to regular training, if they need to relieve certain muscle groups just to get that physiological adaptation, as Dave mentioned before. It's not necessarily modality specific. A few of our other athletes were potentially a little underweight. So with the heavyweight group, we have some athletes that could definitely use some more lean muscle mass gains. And so this is probably one of the only opportunities that we're able to give them a very proper hypertrophy program. Otherwise, if they're training for competition, they would not be able to do that. They're just doing too much volume, and it's almost impossible to get true hypertrophy gains. So this is something that we've given 2 or 3 of our athletes, and we hope to, with the help of nutrition, we help to actually get those gains and then rebuild from there, which I think is going to be very positive. Another thing that we were able to do is target some gaps. So we have video sessions with our athletes when they're on the erg, and potentially while they're also doing some of their workouts, and their coaches are able to break down their training technique via video, and there's an extra opportunity, off of the water, that they're able to kind of target those potential gaps. And then specific to S&C, we're able to target, let's say someone's hinge was never ideal. We can use this opportunity now to really hone in on those subtle details to get them ready to train later on. So specific to triathlon, like I mentioned before, there's no swimming. They will be starting maybe in the next few weeks or month or so, be able to get into lakes, which will be good in Victoria, but elsewhere that may not be the case. So something we've been doing with our swimmers is doing some banded and some cable work, going through swim strokes and different positions and that they would typically be doing when they're swimming, to try to maintain that potentially vulnerable position of the shoulder, so that when they return to swimming, they're not completely detrained. Dave alluded to this a little bit earlier, and said that it is available on the CSI YouTube page. And I highly recommend that for swimming sports, to just keep up with some type of patterning there, because the neuromuscular aspect and the muscles involved with swimming are difficult to isolate or to utilize in other situations. So especially going through that full stroke, if you're able to get some type of resistance with a band, or even just body weight and using gravity against your weight of your arm, going through those motions, I think will be very important. These guys also went back to general prep phases and have been going to building aerobic bases, identifying key gaps in each of the athletes, whether it's strength, whether it's cycling, etc. And then to specifically talk about cycling, that's probably the easiest thing, cycling and running, but cycling in particular is the easiest thing to get some intensity on. So we have to be careful with that, because if they are trying to maintain a similar volume that they had with both swimming, running, and cycling, there's not that much room to increase running because of the impact that is involved with running. So the volume has been packed onto the cycling, so that causes potential issues as well that we need to maintain an eye on, because you can get really tight hip flexors. You can there are different postural consequences of doing more cycling that need to be considered, and also just intensity on the bike can potentially be overdone as well with all of the online cycling competitions, etc. So that's just something to consider and stay on top of. Some of our athletes, I work with some para-athletes, Paralympians, who were unable to get a running guide during the initial stages of the quarantine. And so they had to, for a number of weeks, somehow maintain running fitness or durability in their living room. So something we did was create almost like a running drill library of exercises that they did continuously, with just on-the-spot running in between, just to maintain touches in different directions for about like 30 minutes to 45 minutes just to maintain that durability aspect when they do return to run. As we know, if there are breaks, extended breaks in running, the risk of shin splints skyrockets, or calf cramps, etc. Some of those overuse injuries if you do increase running volume, as Dave alluded to earlier. So this is something that we did to try to mitigate that as best we could. So I'm going to let Dave kind of go over and conclude his section, but if you guys have any specific questions about what we've done with the specific sports, please fire away. I'm happy to speak to those. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, MC. Some really good practical insights there of how we can maintain load on the body in this time. So yeah, just to wrap it up, the key take-homes are, continuing our training in a modified form is crucial. So we need to be exposed to demands of sport in order to be resilient against the demands of sport. And then how we do that will vary sport to sport, but it's really important to try and maintain some form of workload. So again, each sport will have its individual demands, but common principles in terms of how the body adapts to exercise, they remain. Just the specific motor patterns and loading will vary. It might be an idea to, again, as Andrew mentioned earlier, we don't really know what we can call this particular phase that we're in, but maybe a pre-season. So what we want to try and do is increase the body's resilience to the demands that we're going to face once we get back into preseason, where then obviously if we've got a good base of work behind us, that transition becomes a lot easier. With cross-training, to maintain those aerobic qualities, the cardiac outputs, and peripheral muscular adaptations that we discussed earlier, it's really important to be aware of the athlete's capabilities. So it's probably not a great idea to send a 300-pound shot putter out for a run for the first time in their life. So maybe a bike is more appropriate for that athlete. Or yeah, on the flip side, exposing maybe a 100-meter sprinter to hours and hours of biking may not be super beneficial for them. Again, there's a lot we can do at this time. We have a lot of challenges, but also windows of opportunity, as MC alluded to address weak points, take a mental break, and develop a little bit more holistically as an athlete. And just another consideration, again, it was mentioned before, but it's a difficult time for everyone. So try to be creative in terms of how we can try and improve athlete motivation, whether that's just almost in a social support way, or increasing their autonomy, or maybe being a little bit looser in terms of the training prescription that we give them. These things are just small little tools in the toolbox that we can use to try and get the best outcome out of this whole situation. And again, just would like to thank everyone for joining today. And hand you over to Luca. So thanks again, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Dave and MC. We'll just have a quick few seconds here while we load Luca's presentation up. And when I think during Luca's presentation, he's going to put a link to BC Soccer's website for you, so that you can just take a look at some of the programs that they're putting in there. So when he puts that link in, we'll probably take a 3-minute break just for you to have a quick look around their program, and then at the end of Luca's presentation, we'll come back and we'll do a short question and answer. So Luca, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, and great stuff, Dave and MC. Before I start, I just want to have a disclaimer. I am nowhere the expert on S&C training that Dave and MC are. We were asked from CSI to present the activities that we're doing at BC Soccer with our provincial program. Just to give you context of our provincial program, we work with a group of U16 athletes, two age groups. Right now it's 04 and 05 born, male and female. We work with them once a week in conjunction with their club training. So we'll take them once a week, and then they'll train with their club 3 to 4 times throughout the rest of the week with the provincial program. So with this program, I'm touching on. I'm gonna touch on the strength and conditioning aspect at the end, but I'm gonna go pretty much through. Just trying to get control here. Through everything. So this presentation you're going to see is going to touch on all aspects within our 4 pillars of play. Purpose was to provide short-term support for the players during the stoppage. Was to keep soccer a positive outlet for these players during the stoppage as well. And then again, we're touching on in this program technical, tactical, physical, and mental, and a little bit of social and emotional with that as well. So we've been given we were given the big lockdown March 13th from the CSA that all sanctioned soccer activity is now being postponed for the time being. So I have day 44 of this lockdown. Just before I go on to the extra slides, is there's also I like to find a silver lining in all of this, and as a technical department, we always sat down and had things that we wanted to get out for our specific programming and for our members, and although we're not on field coaching and doing what we love, or the players playing and doing what they love, this provided us at BC Soccer an opportunity to make sure that we could have these programs, and it's been a positive in creating these programs going forward. So this is just to go through what we've done for the players. So with the technical package, and I'm gonna send a link in a few minutes so we can take a break. It was to provide players fun and challenging activities that can be performed in isolation. Sorry. All they needed was a ball, a small place, a safe place to practice, potentially an obstacle to dribble around, and a surface to pass against. The players were encouraged to adapt these activities to meet their needs and abilities, and invent new ways to keep them active with the ball. These are the skills that we focused on within this technical package. So we have after this slide, I'll send you the link. We have a control package, we have a juggle package, a dribble package, and a passing package. And then off front and center is the catching for the goalkeepers, in which they need to work as well. So in the chat, I'll paste the link, and you can see it there. The left tab will show you the individual skill activities. The right tab will touch on our physical program that I'm going to touch on in a few slides. But if you want to take a couple minutes and use this as a break just to go through, then Andrew, feel free to let them go and then call them back when you see fit.
Yeah, so maybe if we just take sort of 4 minutes here, and then we'll jump back in. So we'll let you click on those links and take a look at that.
Again, what we try to do at BC Soccer is get our players to actually do it. So this got the players out there to do these exercises as well. So they were able to do that with specifically our provincial program players. We did release this to the wider membership so they can use it as well. But again, it was simple exercises so the players can get out. They can do it in their house, as you can see some examples in the videos. They can do it in their garden, their backyard, a parkade, a back lane. So these are just some exercises that we wanted to get them out with the ball and continuing their technical exercises. So we'll give you about a minute or so to have a look at them, and then we'll continue with those. Good. So we'll move on there. Again, you can use that as an example of what we've done at BC Soccer. Again, those were something that we've always had in plans to do. Some individual skill activity and a physical plan. So again, silver lining to this stoppage is that we were able to create it and get it out to our programs and then the wider membership. So yeah, have a look. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think, and then we can go from there. So to continue with our COVID-19 at-home program, the second pillar of play we wanted to touch on was tactical. With our players, they've all been provided access to the match analysis online platform that we use at BC Soccer, which is called Coach Logic. So from there, we upload their own games that we played against the Whitecaps and or other visiting provinces, as well as some international Champions League matches where the players have been given the opportunity to learn how to clip to learn tactical situations. We'll give them some homework. Example being as a backline unit, what are 2-3 opportunities where we played out the back well? What are to our attacking unit? What are 2 or 3 opportunities where you ran in behind and asked for a ball in behind? So a little bit of homework that they can work on. They can watch themselves. With this platform as well, Coach Logic is an opportunity for them to clip their own videos and potentially make their highlight videos to help themselves pursue some post-secondary opportunities as well. So Coach Logic is the program that we use. I'll just touch the next slide is a picture of the platform. But there are many platforms out there. There's Huddle, there's Game Breaker, but this is the specific one we use at home. So they've been good to work with. They've allowed us access for our players. We have roughly 55 players within our development groups that we train with on a weekly basis. So they've all been given access to this to use at home and to be able to make clips, watch themselves, and then make some clips of some international games as well. With the mental, social, emotional workshops, again, this is something that we had planned even if there was a stoppage of play or not. We started our mental development workshops with the players. They're delivered in partnership with Kizo Performance. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Zoran is from the island. I know he's worked with Andrew's group at the VI Wave and some groups on the island. And the topic of these sessions that with the players which is how to train in quarantine. We had our female workshop on Monday, and we'll have the male one this afternoon at 4:30. We'll look to follow up. Again, this is our first time we're actually having some mental work with these players. So we'll see how it works with the players. We'll see how Zoran felt it went, and we'll look to continue the support on this. It's an important pillar of play for us. We'll also be having a number of workshops with key speakers, including current and ex-national team players, to help our players share their knowledge and experience and their journeys. As well as we'll have some workshops with key stakeholders in the game, such as Canadian Premier League, who will connect the pathway with our players and hopefully becoming professional within the newly formed Canadian Premier League. So just to touch on that, we've managed to get Julia Grosso. She's an ex-player within our program and moved from within our high performance league into our provincial program through Rex, and now is a women's national team, full-time women's national team player. She'll come and talk to our players on Monday, May 4th. And then the following Wednesday, we'll have Michael Finley, who's the director of football development with the Canadian Premier League. He'll talk to our male players on the vision of the league and how to and what they're looking for in players and how to potentially get into the league moving forward up the pathway that way. So we felt it's important to provide this to our players. Again, the social emotional part of it was tough because we're not together a lot, but we felt if we can get together on Zoom, then the players can feel like we are still have a program and they're part of something. So we decided to go this way. And we're also hoping that we can secure some more national team players to talk, former players within our program to talk to our players, our current players as well. This touches with, leaves us with the last couple slides from me. is our physical training plan, which we just released to our provincial program players specifically last Friday, so they can start it this past Monday, the 27th, and it was released to our wider membership on Monday as well, this past Monday, the 27th. Again, on the link that I sent you, it's the right tab if you want to have a look at those videos in your spare time to see what we did. We did it in consultation with the Canadian Sports Institute. As you can see in the videos, Dave is the main star. He did some great work with that. But I also want to acknowledge, I know he's on hopefully still online, Nick Clark for his help on this. I work closely with Dave and Nick to get this program launched. Again, it's always something that we've always wanted to have for our players, provincial program players, specifically in the off season, which is the summer and in the Christmas window. But now this is something that we finally got up and launched. So we're happy and pleased with how it went. The focus is for U15 to adult players. Again, we work with specific U16 group on a weekly basis, so we wanted to make sure that the focus was for them, and then anybody can use this, older than that can use this program for them. It's to provide players with physical exercises that can be performed at home, and to assist the players in maintaining and improving physical fitness. Again, we didn't want to have exercises that needed a ton of equipment, a ton of space. So as you can see in the videos, it's a lot of body weight stuff. At most, we're using backpacks, water, fill up water bottles, and like Dave touched on, it's being creative and how to add some weight and resistance to the strength training that they're doing. Again, this was sent to our provincial program. We had a Zoom meeting with myself and Dave last Friday. They started it on this past Monday, and it's now available for our wider membership, something that we're proud of. We released within the BC Soccer technical staff. It's a 6-week program. So, for example, if our players started it on this past Monday, they should finish first week of June. And that will bring them to the end of if we were still playing, the end of our provincial program phase, which runs from the beginning of March into the end of May. So just to keep them ticking over that way as well. And again, we won't touch on the specifics. You can go into the BC Soccer link that I sent you and say that. But the 6-week program is the upper left of the screen. I know that Dave touched on that earlier, and he was very good to help design this and the specific focuses throughout the weeks within the program. And that we have a strength program, an endurance program, and then a speed program. That leads to further support the players with the correct implementation of these exercises. Myself and Dave and our partners at the CSI will be conducting weekly check-ins for the players. So if they have any questions about the exercises, if they need to increase anything or ask any technique questions, we're going to be helping them on a weekly basis with this program. We've also in this program we want to keep a little bit of competitive juices flowing. So we do have a 30-minute run that the players are doing every Saturday, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And so we've asked them to report their distance on that, and then we can have a leaderboard, for lack of a better term or not, so we can see that what they're doing and how they're competing with each other within the program. We've also encouraged them to, if they can and where they can, to potentially work out together via Zoom or via any other video platform meetings that they can do, just to be able to provide some support for one another, to be able to push each other and anything like that. So again, a little bit to touch on the social emotional pillar as well for them. So we're really proud of this program that we sent out. A massive thank you to Dave, Nick, and the CSI crew that helped us create this, and we were happy to get it out. So that's it for me. I just wanted to touch on what we're doing for our players within the 4 corners of play for that. So I can pass it over to Andrew if there's any questions for any of the presentations that we had today. So thanks for the opportunity. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Luca. What I want to do now is maybe just open up for just a minute or two to see if we have Any questions or anything that we might want to discuss, and ask you if you want to put your hand up or just put something into the chat box. So we'll just give that a minute or two to see where we're at here. So Dave, Nick has a question, and it's around accumulating volume, and what rates of progression would they recommend for a gradual weekly increase of that training load? Would that be an extra hour, 2 hours a week, or a percentage?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Nick, and it's one that I think you should be aware of the context of what you're doing. Obviously, if you've done nothing, everything is going to be a quite substantial jump in terms of volume or intensity. So if you look at the research from Gabbett, he puts the upper threshold at somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5 times what you've done in the preceding weeks. But also within research, you'll see a figure of 10% each week. So it's a difficult question, and I think if you would look at it more, it depends basically on what you've done. If you've accumulated a couple of weeks of training, then maybe try and limit that to below 1.3 times what you've done in the preceding weeks. So if you've had an average of 10 kilometers total over the preceding 4 weeks, then maybe you don't want to go too much above 13 kilometers in the current week. I don't know if MC, if you have anything else to add to that.
There you go. No, yeah, what you said is pretty accurate. Gabbett's work suggests there's a range between about 0.8 to 1.3% of what you've done in the average of the last 4 weeks. And that's kind of referring back to the acute chronic workload ratios and trying to find that ideal progression, but not overdoing spikes. And right now, kind of, I'd play it a little bit safe, on the safer side, and keep it around 1.2 or so, 1.3 times. And then in terms of, and that would be for, all of your work. And if you're trying to progress strength versus progressing conditioning sessions, etc., there's different considerations involved, but that's a pretty general sense of how to progress things and get a safe overload.
Okay, thanks guys. Rebecca asked a question, have we considered any changes to insurance due to any added risk that comes from athletes training virtually and not under supervision of a coach? For example, if they complete an exercise incorrectly and injure themselves and were theoretically not receiving the appropriate supervision. Okay, so that's a really good question, Rebecca, and I think it's almost like a PSO, NSO question as well. Obviously we're concerned about what athletes would do on their own. So I'm going to maybe throw that one back and not have that one to be an S&C question, almost like an insurance question. And maybe I would suggest that would be something to discuss with the PSO or your particular club.
Andrew,
I hope you don't think I'm ducking out of that one.
Andrew, can I just jump in there? Can you hear me?
Sure, Luca.
I don't have any specifics, but prior to this presentation here, we did have a BC Soccer all-staff meeting, and that was touched on by our executive director. So I know that they're thinking about it. I don't have the answer for you, Rebecca, right now, but I know that that's been spoken about at the ED level. Yeah.
Thanks, Luca. I see Daniel has made, Daniel from Taekwondo here has pointed out that the PSO got a rider added to the group insurance to include virtual training. I think that's probably a great way to look at that. So some good questions there. So that's great. Thank you. So just in closing, so obviously, here's another question. Who might this be?
Marky.
So this is Nick. Nick's typing again. Yes, it is Nick. Yeah. Dave, do you recommend the blood flow restriction technique for teenagers in isolation? And is this suitable for developing athletes? And is there a way to get a similar effect without blood occlusion cuffs?
Yeah. So that's another good question. Specifically to teenagers, I would avoid it. But I would say that for any athlete that would look at using that, or any coach advising it, it's absolutely crucial to get medical approval to do so. So that's really the key concern, that it's safe to do per individual as decided by medical staff. And then to the second part of the question. There definitely are ways of doing that. So one of them being working through a limited range of motion. So if you're doing a push-up, you'll be kind of between the bottom quarter of the movement, and you'll basically exclude the bottom quarter of the movement and the top quarter of the movement. And what happens then is just because of the orientation of the muscle, there will be less blood flow going to the muscle, and potentially you'll get that ischemic effect where limited blood flow, where you get a preferential activation of type 2 fibers, which obviously they have greater potential to grow.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Here's Nick again. That's great. Okay, so let me finish off by thanking everybody again for coming along to the webinar today. We have got a recording for you, and we'll be sending that out. And we're back on May the 6th, supporting athletes holistically during COVID-19. And I'll get that out to you sometime tomorrow. Just wanted to make you aware, just in the chat box there, we've got a performance speaker session tomorrow afternoon from Jen Joyce, who's going to talk about effective coaching. That's a two-part series, so that's tomorrow and next Thursday. So again, we'd encourage you to take part in as many of these as you can. And then I just want to leave you with something, and I don't want to be a harbinger of doom. But I've recently been reading The Signal and the Noise, which is a book from Nate Silver, who has a website, 538.com. He's a pretty good statistician, and he introduces in his book Bayes' theorem, which is a mathematical formula for determining conditional probability. And what this theorem does, it lets you update a probability given new evidence. So the probability of an event occurring increases if you can find a prior. So if a prior is detected, for example, a pandemic, it increases the probability of something happening. What I want to say is that this situation that we find ourselves in, or a reaction by our government to another pandemic in the future, is going to happen again. Now, that may be 5 years down the line, that may be 10 years down the line. But I think that this is something that we will see again. And the question I have for everybody is, what are we going to learn from this, and how will we better be prepared for, the next time we find ourselves in a situation? Okay, thanks very much, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. And I'll make sure that we get this information out as quickly as we can. And I'll finish with thanks to Dave, to MC, and to Luca. Many thanks for your time today. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.